Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. My name is Sebastian Moore.
And I'm Hilary.salt.
And it's very exciting today because we're joined by Graham Stringer, the MP for Blackley and Middleton South. So Graham was, I think, first elected as a councillor in Manchester in 1979. He led Manchester City Council from 1984 to 96 and has been an MP since 1997. Is that right, Graham?
That's spot on.
And you are, do you know, this is special because you are our first MP on the podcast. We've had somebody from the House of Lords, but you're the first person from the House of Commons.
Well, pleased to be here. I will try and answer the questions that you ask.
Great. So I suppose you're quite renowned for being rather outspoken. And I think anybody that doesn't know you and hears we have a Labour MP on will maybe have a certain idea or a certain impression of what the things you might believe in. But you were a Brexiteer, you are against net zero, you voted against stricter lockdown measures for the Northwest. You're quite unusual as a Labour MP, is that right?
In those particular issues, at the present time I'm in a minority. But of course, when I first joined the Labour Party, I would think 80% of Labour Party members were against the coal market. So the party has clearly changed on those issues. So my core values, I think, are Labour values. I believe in increasing democracy, a more equal society produced by progressive taxation. I think those are what most people who join the Labour Party believe in. I also believe in the close relationship with the trade union movement, which formed the Labour Party. So in that sense, I'm a typical Labour MP. But I think having the privilege of being elected, I think you have a duty to look at issues, and both as a responsibility to the Labour Party and to your constituents and to the country, to look at those issues and come to the best conclusion that you can on them, and explain your reasons for doing it. And if it conflicts with where a majority of the Parliamentary Labour Party is, then it's sensible to speak out. What other reason is there for being a member of Parliament? Obviously, you're elected on a manifesto, which gives you a duty to, in most circumstances, vote for the manifesto you stood on. But most things we vote on are not in the manifesto.
Do you feel like you've become more empowered to speak your mind throughout your career, or have you always been outspoken?
I think the easiest way to answer that is immediately before I became leader of the council, I'd been expelled from the Labour group on Manchester City Council for life, sin ADA. So I think that's which when people who agreed with me on the Labour group on Manchester Council became a majority, it gave the National Party a difficulty. So yeah, I've argued and voted the way I believe is right over a period of time. Being on the backbenches gives you a glorious freedom, really. If you're a leader of a council, if you're a minister, both of which I've been, then you have to toe the line, even if you've had quite a strong influence on what the line is. You can't just go out there as a leader of the council and say, I'm going to do this, if you've discussed it with the Labour group and the whole council and come to a different conclusion. So I enjoy the freedom to ask questions, to come to conclusions and argue the point. I think that's really what makes representative democracy work.
That sounds right to me, but I guess what I would push back on a little is that you don't see very many MPs doing that these days.
You don't. And just with the present Parliamentary Labour Party, which is in round figures 400 Labour MPs, about 240 of them are new. And it can be quite scary being on your own. Many of them have been on courses to explain how things work, what Labour Party policy is. Suddenly to stand up and be on your own or in a small group, or even to think things out is difficult. So I think that's a particular moment. I also think there has been a movement to be less outspoken. Although, and this may surprise you, when you look at the Blair government, there were more people and more votes against the Labour whip during that period than in any previous Labour administration. So the picture is complex.
I suppose the other thing that you notice when you look at Labour MPs now compared to maybe, how they might have looked 30 or 40 years ago is that there are far less people who, come from a working class background, perhaps have a history in the trade union movement, perhaps have been a shop steward in an engineering firm and then come into Parliament. Why have all those kind of people disappeared from our parliamentary ranks?
I think there's difficult question, but you're undoubtedly correct in your analysis. There are less engineers, less people who work with the hands, less manual labourers, and more people who've got PPE from Oxford or Cambridge or degrees in social studies from other universities. I think basically a lot more people have been to university and a lot less people work in industry. We have a much smaller industrial base. So I think that explains it. But I think it's a bad thing. I think we have less experience out there in the world. I don't like the term, but I can't think of a better one just at the moment. There are less people who've had real jobs, less people who've worked in the private sector. And I think that narrowness of experience is a bad thing. And you see the same on the Conservative benches, that they mirror what the Labour Party is, that the more people with degrees from good universities who've not worked in the private sector or anything else on the Conservative benches. So the balance you used to get in the Conservative Party of people who'd made their money in the city, lawyers, reactionary old fogies from the counties, which at least represented something. They didn't represent nothing. They were sort of symbolic of the constituencies they represented. They've become much more homogenous as well. So I think it's partly society's changed. It's partly the selection process, but Parliament is poorer for having narrowed that base down.
And do you think there's any way that that's changing a bit? So we talked the other week to an organisation called Blue Collar Parliament, who are trying to push for more, ordinary working people to be selected in constituencies. And I think if you look at things like, for example, the stuff that Sharon Graham is doing at Unite, where she's trying to take the trade union back to workplaces to kind of get involved in proper industrial issues rather than getting involved in politics. Does that signify maybe some kind of change in mood?
Well, I hope so. I've not seen any evidence of that so far, but I hope so. I think one of the problems for the Labour Party is that many of the trade unions' numbers have diminished, and they've partly diminished because they're not doing the hard yards in private industry. Most of the trade union members are now in either public sector or organisations or things that used to be public sector and have been privatised. So the tough fights in some of the commercial organisations in finance or other areas are not being had by the trade union movement. The other thing I should have mentioned, and it's relevant to both questions you've just asked is the really big change in Parliament, particularly Parliamentary Labour Party, is the drive to have more women representing constituencies. So there are more women Labour MPs now than there are men, and the number of women in Parliament has increased dramatically. It was a handful of women uh, only 40 years ago, whereas now and they all knew each other. Not politically, but just because there were so few of them across parties, they talked and worked together. So I think because of the different trajectories that women's employment has, that has affected the general employment background of members of Parliament.
Mhm.
And it's a good thing that there are more women in Parliament, just in case there's any doubt
Yeah.
in that answer.
And I suppose the other thing that this kind of train of thought leads on to is around the extent to which Parliament is focused on things like rebuilding our old industrial towns or our coastal communities, where you have all these phrases like red wall voters and levelling up and all those things. And I mean, I think the Labour Party is kind of sincere in wanting to do something, but it doesn't really feel like they're making very much difference, and actually it doesn't feel like the voices of those communities are really being heard in Parliament.
I think there's some truth in that, and I don't think the Labour Party has developed policies or theories on why this has happened. There are powerful institutions within government, the Treasury being probably the most powerful, but the rest of the civil service as well, whose theories about the economy are very different from the core views of the Labour Party. I mean, simply, the Treasury believes in privatisation. It believes in investing in London because the evidence is that productivity in London is higher than the rest of the country. And the Treasury doesn't examine the reason why. And the reason why, in many cases, is because there has been more investment there, and investment follows investment. So if you look at transport, which is the best example, but it applies to other areas, and how that affects employment, the Treasury will say, well, what's the benefit of investing in this rail line, this tube, whatever, and they will measure that on the time lost getting to work. Well, London's a congested place, so the figures suggest you should invest in London because you will get productivity gains. You invest in a new railway line or whatever, and that brings its own both congestion and economic benefits. And so you get more and more investment in London. I always describe it as investing in congestion, because it leads to more congestion. Where if you if you invested in Manchester, Birmingham, our other major hubs, it would take longer, but you would not get the resulting congestion, and you would, not immediately, but you would get very large economic benefits. And I just don't think, to answer your question, I don't think we have, as the Labour Party, as the Labour movement, really taken on that institutional inertia of the Treasury. And the final point I will make is that the Treasury likes to privatise things. They like investing in the South East, and similarly, the Foreign Office answer to everything is we need to be in the European Union. So you get those two powerful institutions that basically leave the regions lagging behind.
Yeah, so for me, it seems like, and I think a lot of people in in the north and outside of the Westminster bubble sort of recognise this, is that a lot of people within that bubble are sort of out of touch. And so when they come up with something like levelling up, I think, okay, that sounds good, but I just feel instinctively like they're going to fumble it and they're going to mess it up because they are out of touch, not only with maybe how people in red wall constituencies feel, but in terms of the ways of thinking, like you've just said about, oh, London, we need to improve, there's congestion in London, so let's attack that problem rather than looking at other areas. I mean, I think this is true with HS2 as well. Like I think I'm quite a fan of high-speed rail, but I think anybody in the north recognises we need better connections from Manchester to Leeds, for example. So is there not a fundamental problem on a more systemic level of the fact that the politicians we have are just out of touch with the general populace?
I would put it slightly differently. They're over-influenced by the advice they get from the civil service. I think it's a criticism regularly made of members of parliament. My experience of members of parliament, for whatever party, they want to do the best for their constituents. We probably meet more members of the public from more areas when we do surgeries than anybody else apart from journalists, probably.
Yep.
Who go out chasing stories. So I think it's a slightly easy and unfair criticism of members of parliament, but I understand why it's made, because people see money investments going in places they don't want to, and their MPs being unable to do that. And going back to the deep roots of this, when Clem Attlee and even Harold Wilson were Labour prime ministers, they could basically instruct industry where to go. The powers that government had during the Second World War meant that they could tell Vauxhall to go to Merseyside because they needed jobs in Merseyside. And that basically went on in one form or another, trying to develop regional policy until the 80s, until the Thatcher government, when it was a free market philosophy that Thatcher and that government believed in. And basically it stopped. And we as a Labour movement have not developed a new substantial policy on regional development since.
I guess when we met you at Politics in Pubs, Graham, you started off your speech saying that there was a time when the local council controlled lots and lots of things like the gas supply and the transport and local finances to an extent that councils don't now because so much of it is centrally mandated. So I think I agree with you that that as a political as a parliament, our parliament needs to re-engage with the idea of how do we take services closer to the public so that those services are more able to adapt to needs on a regional basis. So, I mean, you might start off that conversation with talking about things like nationalisation of water and utilities and energy. But then how do you that doesn't bring power any closer? It kind of takes power out of the hands of some of the venture capitalists and the private sector organisations, but it doesn't democratise anything. Where's the democracy element of that discussion?
I think the utilities that used to be under local control, gas and electricity, are not going to come back under local control. I think that's gone. Some of the other services that used to be provided by local authorities, I think when I started that talk, I pointed to the health service, and that the leader of Manchester City Council, Manchester Corporation as it was then, after the health service had been set up and the 5 hospitals that Manchester Council controlled had been taken out of their hand, he, in a book he wrote, he was quite critical, I suppose, of that change, and did not think that the National Health Service was doing a better job than local authorities. So I think you could look at health, which is overburdened with bureaucracy and processes that try to mimic the market by bringing health closer to local democracy, and that would help. The central government has never managed to bring together social care and the health service. One of the financial problems at the moment is there are many people in hospital who should be in care homes, and they're not because of the different financial structures and the central bureaucracy. So I think there's a win there, and there's a win in economic policy training and other areas of services. So while we can't go back to 1945 and all the things that councils control, you can go back to a lot more control. And I think when we go back to the comments on Tuesday, there's a bill before Parliament called devolution, which is about planning. I've not read the bill, so I'll be clear about that. But my reading of the summaries of it is that it's not a devolution bill, it's a centralisation bill, which will centralise some of local government and will put more power in the hands of central government as you go up. And before next Tuesday, I will read that bill, or read it in more detail. So I'm not sure we're going in the right direction on those things.
It's something we've talked about, isn't it? That you, in an attempt to decentralise, you can actually cause more centralisation.
Yes.
And we were just talking before this interview about Greater Manchester and Andy Burnham as the mayor of Greater Manchester, and that he's probably been able to achieve things that you couldn't have done, like the B network, for example, which is this unified transport network we have here in Greater Manchester. And he probably wouldn't have been able to achieve that, or Manchester wouldn't have been able to achieve that, if we had only local authorities like Manchester Borough Council or City Council, Wigan Council and Oldham Council, etc. So are you a fan of the Metro mayors?
I'm a fan of mayors, and I think Andy has done a good job on being a voice for Greater Manchester, and in many cases, during COVID, for the whole of the North England. I think he's done a really good job. I'm not sure I agree with you that you couldn't have produced an integration of bus services without a mayor. We've got a mayor, he's done a good job, no criticism. Whether it could have been achieved with the old municipal bus companies, I don't know. They were brought together by Barbara Castle in 1967, I think, with something called Cellnet, which evolved into the PTEs, and that did bring the bus companies together when there was still a lot of councils. I can't remember how many councils there were in Greater Manchester then, but a lot. So it was achieved by centralisation. It's difficult to imagine when the 10 districts in Greater Manchester have never had control of buses, whether they could have achieved it. All I would say is that when the old county council went, the 10 authorities worked together on the Passenger Transport Authority and produced Metrolink. We produced the tram system, and we were first in the country to do it, and that was 10 authorities working together. So all power to Andy's elbow, he's done a good job. To your question, could the 10 authorities have done it? I think they probably could.
So do we take it from that you're not a big fan of Metro mayors?
No, you don't really.
Okay, sorry.
You asked the question, I tried to answer it. I think having somebody like Andy working with the 10 districts has worked. The reason I'm cautious with the answer is that Manchester, partly because of the experience since the abolition of Greater Manchester County Council, has worked better between the coordination of the councils than South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, West Midlands, etc. Those areas almost certainly will benefit from having mayors and devolve powers. Having one person to speak in all those areas, as I say, Andy's done a great job at voicing the concerns of the whole of Greater Manchester. I think that was so. I'm supportive of that level of devolution, and what you've got to remember is there was a deal done primarily in Greater Manchester to get devolved powers when mayors were set up. That was the deal that George Osborne wanted. So these things don't come out of fresh air. And it was a good deal that gave the whole of the county more power. So I'm not a critic of Andy or mayors.
I suppose what it does do, having a metro mayor, is that it gives you that figurehead, somebody that people can sort of rally behind to try and get stuff done. And Andy Burnham, here in Manchester, is a name that people know and a face that people recognise. And that's not true for all politicians. And something we talk about is it's not necessarily the lack of accountability, but the lack of recognition in terms of, if I live in a certain area, do I know who my councillor is? Do I know who my MP is? Who do I go to if I need to get something done? I was speaking to John Leach. Of course, he was MP for Manchester Withington. And he was saying it's something that's really annoying is when you get, as an MP, you're expected to do things for your constituency, despite the fact that you have no real executive control over that. All you can do is kind of point people in the right direction or contact people. And he was saying that should be done, all of that should be done by councillors, and people should know their councillors more. But I suppose that's unrealistic. So I don't know, something we were talking about is the fact that Andy Burnham is a popular name, and I guess a popular politician, one of the very few popular politicians at the moment, probably partly because he's got executive control, so people can look at him and say he's actually in charge of these things. Whereas, and it's true if you look across to the States, that governors generally do better in presidential nomination elections because they have a record that they can stand on, whereas senators don't necessarily. So I wonder if that's maybe that's a reason that I'm not sure which side of the fence I come down on this. I think I quite like the Metro Mayor, having lived in Manchester for the last 3.5 years. But I suppose that level of executive control means that people at least know who is in charge of their area, certainly in terms of things like transport.
I agree with that, essentially. That people write to Andy about all sorts of things he's not in control of, because I sometimes get copied into the correspondence by constituents. But having a figurehead who they can hold to account, I think I agree completely with that analysis. Where it's not worked so well in Metro mayors, both in Greater Manchester and in the other areas, is with the police. I still don't think we've got quite the relationship with elected representatives and the police, where people feel Andy Burnham is the police commissioner in effect, that they don't feel that if they have a problem with policing, Andy is the right person, which he is. And I just don't think that's broken through in the way that on economic policy and transport it has broken through. We've got a much better, we've had 2 Duff chief constables, and we've now got a much better chief constable. But how you get that expressed democratically has been very difficult, and I don't think that barrier has been broken through. We should not have had to put up with the 2 Duff chief constables for as long as we did.
We can always rely on you to speak your mind, Graham.
What's the point of being an MP if you don't say what you think?
Yeah. I suppose we're kind of stumbling towards the idea of control and democratic control, which perhaps brings in 2 things. One is kind of the influence that law has over politics now. And I know recently you've been quite critical of Lord Hermer. And do you want to just explain the background to that?
I don't like being personal in politics, but I don't think Lord Hermer should ever have been appointed. As far as I'm aware, he's the first Attorney General for more than 100 years to have been appointed with no elected experience. He's taken straight out of, I think it's Matrix Chambers. And,
yeah, it is, yeah.
Given this job. Now, most people would find it difficult to name any of the last 5 Attorney Generals there's been. It's an obscure office of government, an important office of government whose job has been to advise the government on legal affairs. I and this government, I believe in the rule of law and democracy. There are some lawyers, and the current Attorney General is one of them, who don't share my belief in parliamentary democracy. He has stated on a number of occasions he's working towards an international framework of liberal policies framed in international agreements which will override parliamentary democracy. And he has been arrogant enough to say that these international treaties are more important than parliamentary democracy. Now, I think that's outrageous. It is an attack on parliamentary democracy, and a Labour minister should not be saying those things. Most MPs, well, I think all MPs get into politics because they want to change things. That means changing the law. If you have laws, treaties, agreements, conventions set up 75 years ago for usually very good reasons at the time, but the world changes, then I think you should be able to change those conventions or withdraw from those treaties. Hermer doesn't believe that we should be able to do that, and I think that's wrong. He's given advice on the Chagos Islands. I think I'm not a lawyer, but very dodgy advice to give the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, which will cost us 30-odd billion pounds. I mean, it's very dodgy advice on the basis of an international criminal court, which has a Chinese judge as part of it from an autocracy, and it's only advisory. He says we've got to follow it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't agree with that. On the boat crossings, which is a major problem to the government, the undocumented asylum seekers that are crossing the channel. He said that we can't withdraw from the international agreements which allow them to apply for asylum and give us a basis for the judgments, the over-liberal judgments, in my view, that the tribunals make. Well, I think we should withdraw. We have a problem now, not in 1951, and I think we should change it. If you can't change these things, then you don't have a democracy.
It is SDP policy, Graham, just to point it out.
Right. I will not be joining the SDP.
It's okay. This wasn't a sales call. Yeah, when over the past few years, we're living in a very strange time, and certain moments over the past few years where you'd hear members of Parliament say, "Oh, we can't do that; it's against the law." I'm like, but aren't you the ones that make the law? It's like we're living in a very strange moment, and I think you're speaking to something which we believe in so strongly, which is parliamentary sovereignty. You're the ones that are there to represent us, citizens of this country, and make laws for the country. So if there's something that is undermining that, like an international convention, that should be on the table. And there are certain politicians who, for them, it's just an absolute. They couldn't even imagine something like withdrawing from the ECHR or looking at these conventions. So I wonder if you were, at any other point in history, if you are there with somebody like Lord Hermer, and I completely share your point that it's not a personal thing. This is just an example of why we are where we are. But it strikes me that you and Lord Hermer would have very little to agree on. It seems like you almost come from completely different belief systems, and yet you find yourself in the same party. Is that a representation of kind of where we've got to now, that these parties are really weird, strange coalitions? And I know they always have been, but it feels like the political landscape is really shifting, and we don't know where the steady ground is.
During the debate on leaving the EU before the referendum, I was shocked, genuinely shocked. I mean, I've been in the Labour Party all my life. I know lots of Labour Party members, as of how deep the feeling was among some of my colleagues that it was better if the European Union made laws rather than we do. Because of forgetting the economy, forgetting all sorts of other things, the debate at the centre of the referendum was whether we should make our own laws in a sovereign parliament or they should be made elsewhere. And that argument keeps coming up time and time again. And it is a surprise to me that when I put the Tony Benn points of view, that in a democracy, you should know who makes the laws on your behalf and you should be able to remove them, that actually quite a lot of Labour MPs didn't agree with that. And if I can be critical of some of the ones who are now ministers, I debated this with, they believed that in a shallow way. It had become part of their belief system, and they fell back when I think they thought they were losing the arguments. Well, Europe has great culture. Bach and Beethoven, Zola, and great novelists and playwrights. Europe has great culture. We don't want to lose that. Well, you don't lose it if you protect your own democracy. But so the debate surprised and puzzled me. And, you know, there was a time when most people agreed with me in the Labour Party. They don't now, but that's the reason to have a debate.
And after that referendum on the EU, I know that there was a lot of talk of the political map shifting. So you had the sort of more Leave areas and the more Remain areas, and there was talk of the two main parties, Labour and Conservatives, changing to accommodate that. And I don't think that's necessarily manifested itself properly, because we've now moved on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so I wonder now, what are the dividing lines? You know, who is, when you meet somebody in the street nowadays, it's they could be, you know, working class and voting for reform, or they could be living in central London and you'd think probably voting for the Green Party. It's like, it seems like it's very hard to. It seems like it's harder than it has been, certainly in my lifetime, don't know about yours, to sort of cast nets on people and say, you're in that camp and you're in that camp.
I think what you're saying is that politics in this country, since the franchise became universal, has been class-based. Not entirely. There have always been rich people who voted Labour and poor people who voted Conservative. But that has been gradually changing. And for the reasons we were talking about before, the country is more divided in terms of its economic base. Before the 1959 general election, you could look at general elections in this country, and it was why butlers set up swingometers. And the swing in Aberdeen would be the same as the swing in London, would be the same as the swing in St. Ives. We had a very uniform system. Regionally, that's been changing. It was the 1959 general election. There was a first noticeable, measurable difference between the regions, and that's been growing. So you've got regional differences and less class basis in society. And what's not followed, it's very easy if you know, this is my tribe, I'm working class, I'm a trade unionist, I'm going to vote Labour, I'm a small shopkeeper, I'm going to vote for the Tories because they'll look after my business better than Labour. When you move away from that, most people don't think about politics like you think about politics or I think about politics. It becomes very difficult for people. And I think what's happening is that people don't know which tribe they belong to. The last Conservative government failed. pretty abysmally on economic terms, and people said pretty unenthusiastically that they would give Labour a chance. And if you look at the opinion polls, they're not impressed after 12 months. And I think the support that reform is getting is not a massive intellectual analysis of reform's agenda and policies. It's more, those two have failed, we give this lot a chance. And I think that I think people feel homeless, and you don't expect people to look at manifestos with a magnifying glass and think, oh yeah, I'll vote for this one. That's not how the world works. So it's a changed world where people are a bit politically homeless, and the things that they thought they could rely on a Labour government to do if they voted for it, which was to provide better services essentially, and for higher levels of tax, and things they could rely on a Conservative government to do, have lower taxes and do certain things with the economy, just aren't true anymore. So I think people are furrowing their brows and being quite angry because the system isn't delivering for them, and they're going through a list of choices. The worry in that is that they end up in a very extreme place.
So I suppose there's a couple of things that could come about because of that, which is when people feel disenfranchised and they think none of these parties represent me. The idea of being politically homeless now is sort of I'd say it's the default. Most people are. Most of my friends just wouldn't think about politics because they're like, I'm not going to get involved in any of that. And so you might think that people are going to move away from politics and say, I'm only going to partake every 5 years when I've got to vote. I think something we say quite often is that when we look at the problems that this country is facing, it is down to us, you, me, all of us, to actually get involved and do something. And that can be on any level, right? That could be joining a political party. That could be, like Hilary does, mending benches in the local park and not waiting for council permission. Sorry if I've dobbed you in.
No, it's okay.
But it's about actually stepping up and doing something to improve your local area. And if that means, if you're somebody that thinks I could get involved in politics, it's joining a political party and potentially going into parliament like you have. My worry is that we're not sending that message to people at the moment, and we need to take it up on ourselves and actually step up.
I agree with that. I do believe, I believe in social activism of people doing things in their own area to improve it. I hate the phrase NIMBYism, because that sort of implies that people shouldn't have a say over what's happening in their area. I think they should, and if people don't want a development in their own area, doesn't mean to say they're right. There are always balances in these things. They should have a say in it. So I believe in people getting involved, but I also believe in political parties. We live in a much more dangerous world than we used to, and this government, the next government, some government is going to have to take some very difficult decisions, because it's not just that our politics have changed for some of the reasons we've talked about. The world has changed, and it is a really dangerous place at the present time. You don't need to tell anybody about what's happening in Ukraine or the Middle East, but how horrific the dictatorship is in China and Russia. So I think I want people to mend park benches or do whatever, but I also want people to join political parties and be politically engaged on the big issues as well.
We're doing both, so we're okay. Yeah. Perhaps to finally bring it round to one of the things that you mentioned was that there's some things that the government aren't doing that perhaps traditional Labour voters might have expected them to do, and one of those things might be to create a background where it's possible for things like industrial businesses to thrive, and people to have good quality jobs, well paid jobs. And I think we would see, you know, one of the real barriers to that at the moment being energy costs and perhaps the response to climate change and the whole net zero approach. I think you're critical of that as well.
I am. It's a very big subject.
It is.
But the Labour Party was elected on the basis that we would reduce energy bills. We have the highest energy bills in the world for industry. We have the fourth highest energy bills in the world for domestic consumers. So that's a fairly. One of the reasons is that wind power in particular is very expensive, much more expensive than Ed Miliband will tell you it is. So I don't think we should be going down that road. I think the arguments for it, whether it is Ed's argument that he doesn't want us to be dependent on gas and oil from Arab countries that are not democratic and control the market. I don't think that argument stands up for two reasons. One, we could do more with our own gas and oil from the North Sea. And secondly, most of our gas comes from Norway, which is a perfectly democratic country. So that factually doesn't stand up. And then secondly, he is making us dependent on China for many of the materials that go into making the windmills in the North Sea, or the batteries, or the other kit that you need in an alternative weather-dependent energy system. So I don't agree with it. It's an even longer discussion about the science. I'm a scientist. The planet's warming a bit. It's been warming a bit for 10, 12,000 years. I don't really like the arguments put forward by the Green Party, many of my own parties, saying there's an emergency, a crisis in the climate. I don't think the science indicates that. The science is not science as I understand it, it's modelling, which was discredited during COVID. You don't know if your models are right until you've got a history of 50, 60 years. So I don't think it's, when people say the science is settled, I just think that's wrong. And we're putting a lot of money into something that is uncertain. And we're doing it now, and we're charging some of my constituents with regressive taxes, which are what the taxes are to provide the energy. They hit the poorest people more. We're charging people now for things that, if there is a problem, the country and the planet, all predictions say, will be much richer. So it would be much better dealt with in 50 or 60 years' time by richer communities. So I don't support what's going on. And if you're getting to the broader points on science, I think one of the difficulties there is, it's true in COVID, it's true in lots of areas. People are prepared to say things like, we'll follow the science is settled. And most politicians are deeply ignorant of science. There was a survey done of members of parliament recently, and less than half of them got the question right. As if you toss a coin, what are the chances of it coming up heads twice? Now that's the basic lesson one in probability theory. They couldn't do it. And if you ask people about the basic laws of science, and people who talk about science, you say, well, okay, then what's the second law of thermodynamics? They'd be more easily tell you the answer to the second law of cricket than they would of that. So I think it's difficult, and it has led us into some very strange places on energy policy, on COVID, or in all sorts of areas. Again, it's a huge discussion, but the interaction between politics and science is an unhappy space nearly every time it happens.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of your critiques of that. This idea of politicians spouting, well, we just need to follow the science as if they understand the science. I've wondered, because I don't know, it strikes me, I was thinking about this last night, that when it comes to something like energy, it seems like there are two sort of sides to this at the moment that are opening up. And on one side, you've got the Ed Miliband, who I guess, and I'm trying to be fair to his position, sees it as, he would say, this is absolutely existential for our country. So it doesn't matter anything about how much it's going to cost or anything like that. So we have to move away from fossil fuels and we have to decarbonise. And then you've got on the other end, I see that I guess you'd call it I've been calling it the new right, as it were. And I think Reform are trying to occupy that space, and they seem to be quite adverse to certain things like battery storage, and they seem to be very they don't seem to have that vision of what an energy policy we should have. So it's something you said. Do you want to repeat what you said on Tuesday night about energy, of what we should be striving for as a country?
Yeah, we should be striving for cheap energy. Energy so cheap that you don't need to meter it.
That was always the promise of nuclear power.
Yes.
Can I just go back a little bit, because it's something I'd like to say. You can't follow the science. Science doesn't say you should have a lockdown. Science doesn't say you should build windmills in the North Sea. You need politicians and policymakers to use the science as a basis of coming to policy things. It annoyed me during COVID when the Secretary of State for Health said we will follow the science. It's a nonsensical statement. On energy policy, I think I don't disagree with cheap energy, but I think there is a hierarchy of priorities in energy. One is security of supply. Yeah. If you don't have security of supply, it doesn't matter what it costs, you have not got it. So I think that's the priority. The second one, I see this representing one of the poorest constituencies in the country, is the cheapness, the cost of the energy to constituents, because people die because they get cold. They don't because they get hot as well in the summer, but a lot more people die of the cold. So the cost of it is vital. And then thirdly, there is the environmental impact, which is complicated. I mean, when I was growing up, the Clean Air Acts were brought in, and we live in a much cleaner atmosphere now, because the energy that drove the Industrial Revolution and improved the living standards of the people in this country and around the Western world, it also created a lot of pollution and health. So, but without burning the coal that we burnt for 100 and odd years, we wouldn't have had the modern society we've got, with all the modern inventions that have improved it. Part of the cost of that was bronchial diseases and cancer and other things. So you have to think of the environmental costs. And if you believe, as some people do, that it's harming the planet terminally, then you have to take that into account. But I think it's definitely the third priority.
I thought maybe we could bring those things together by going back to that discussion we had about Lord Hermer, because I did bring with me a quote from Maurice Glassman, the Blue Labour peer, about Hermer. He said, "He was the absolute stereotype of an arrogant progressive fool who thinks that law is a replacement for politics." And I think you could replace science for law in that quote and say the same thing. So, politicians seem to want to contract out decision-making either to the law or to the science. And actually what we need is much more of a a kind of battle of ideas about politics. I think that's where we need to bring things back to.
Couldn't agree with that more. Yeah, I do agree with that. And if I have a criticism of my own government, it is those political discussions have been subsumed to lesser decisions by a government that I would describe as technocratic.
Mm-hmm.
People believe that if you study hard, you will come to the right solution. And actually, you can't. You can get information that should help you come to a conclusion that will satisfy. So you have to think, how does this affect X, Y, and Z? Usually constituents, the country, all sorts of things. And that second consideration is not being made. So, but modern politicians, a lot of them, and it applies to both parties, have parceled out decision making to technocrats. Often they're technocrats themselves, so they can have a nice discussion. Or they've sent it off to quangos. There is nothing more annoying as a politician. You write to a minister and they say, oh, this is some quango will deal with that. We've handed it over. So when an Aaron Bevan set up the health service, he said, I'm in charge of everything, from chamber pots under beds to everything. We have a national health service. It's in public control. That's me. The drive over the last, I suppose, difficult to where you put the point, but certainly 40 years, has been to pass those decisions off to bodies, non-departmental bodies, unaccountable bodies, some distance away, against a philosophical background where politicians believe there is a correct answer somewhere if you study the spreadsheets hard enough. And I think politicians, to pinch something from an American show, the West Wing, politicians are better being politicians rather than something else.
So I wanted just a final question from me, just on a more personal level. You've done so much in your political career. What are you most proud of, and what do you want your legacy to be? I'm sure you have got many, many more years left in Parliament, I hope.
I don't believe in legacy at all. I think it's a hideous idea. And it just, if you think about people who want knighthoods, I've seen businesses destroyed by people who believe their legacy is to get a knighthood. And they point their business in all sorts of ways, which they think will curry favour with ministers. I've seen politicians at a local, national level worry at not being able to get to sleep at night because they want to know what people will say about them in 10 years' time and what their legacy is. Well, the answer is nobody will care in 99.9% of cases. Put your energy into doing what's right at the moment. So I don't have an answer to legacy. As I say, I think it's hideous. You should just do your best. I was saying to my wife this morning, and we were saying she'd been advising her niece not to use Americanisms about be the best person you can, and her niece had said she wanted to do that in 2 years' time, and I was saying to do your best every day. That's the issue, because you will have problems every day. So I think that's the philosophical basis. If you ask me on a person, it's not a legacy. There's a lot of buildings in Manchester I've helped to and transport things I've helped it, and they will go ahead. On an emotional level, what I did, which I feel most strongly about, was the fight for gay rights and anti-discrimination, because we changed people's lives and changed society when we were being pilloried for we were accused of only caring about one-legged black lesbians, and that was the standard fare that we got from the Conservative Party, from the tabloid press, from things, and we've turned that into, we won the fight against Clause 28, but we've also changed it so that Conservative cabinets reform, if they ever make a government, those issues will never come up again. We've won the anti-discrimination fight, so those hearts and minds. So emotionally, I feel we did the right thing then.
Great.
Well, do you have anything else?
The only thing I was going to mention, Graham, if it makes you feel any better, that in our Politics in Pubs group this morning, people were saying, I just wish we had more Graham Stringers in Parliament.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
I'm not sure Keir Starmer would share that.
Yeah, I was going to say a shout out to Mandy, who's become your biggest fan, and she said we need more Graham Stringers and Tony Benns.
She did.
So thank you so much for coming on. Keep being outspoken,
Please.
And it was a real honour to interview you as our
Pleasure
first
to have a
MP.
chance. Thank you.